thank you everybody for joining us today. This is all to celebrate AMEC Measurement Month. Very exciting time of the year for anybody who is interested in PR measurement, and we all should be, and it's a time to encourage more people to get involved in PR measurement. It is a great time in November for Measurement Month to be live, because obviously we are coming to the end of a year when we're looking back at the success that we may have had, and also getting ready to setting our new targets and KPIs. So it's always such a great time for it to be placed in the year. So hopefully we will be able to share with you some of our insights, get you to have a little think from a different view and through some of your own measurement, and hopefully some action points to take away with you as well. As I mentioned, I've got Andy joining me today. Hi, Andy.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Andy, do you want to just actually share a little bit about what you do? A little bit of your background would be great.
Sure. As you can tell from the grey in my beard, I've been in the PR industry, worked in and around the PR industry for 37 years. So I've been attempting to get better at measuring kind of PR for most of that. Certainly over the last 10 years or so, I've divided my time between running workshops for CRPR, PRCA, various other bodies, doing my level best to help PR practitioners all around the world get better at measurements, as well as various other aspects of the kind of the PR spectrum. But yes, measurement's definitely something that I get on my soapbox and quite happy to talk about. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Andy. So yeah, we've worked together on a few projects, haven't we? We are both AMEC members, also part of the PRCA Innovation group, where we look at various emerging areas that we all get excited about, and we released a paper last year on share of search, and we've got another one coming out soon, so watch this space with that one. As it says on the screen there, I work at Coverage Book, which is a reporting tool, and before PR Tech was an agency side, so traditional PR, if you like, and then went into SEO, PR, and digital marketing, which is where I really got into improving the success of PR. Yeah, little cheeky plug, I've got a podcast which I always interview great people on every month. In fact, there might be a Measurement Month special coming out tomorrow, so watch out for that. But it's a PR resolution podcast if you want to have a look. This is a Coverage Book webinar. We are hosting it. If you're interested in looking at the other ones, you can have a look here. It's coveragebook.com/webinars. Loads of interesting ones on all sorts of elements of measurement. Yeah, we try and host one at least every month, so all of the past recordings are there. A couple of house rules: ask questions. You're all very active on the chat already, which I love. Do ask your questions, leave them in there, and we will try and get through the slides as quickly as possible, but not too fast, just to answer, you'll save some time to answer questions at the end. And of course, if you like what you're seeing, please share it on Twitter as well. I'm at Stella Bayles. Andy, you're at Andy Smith, isn't it? AIND.
That's right. See, that's right. That's what I get. That was my first ever user handle 32 years ago. It was supposed to be. It's supposed to be ANDY, obviously, but I mistyped it and hit enter.
Oh, really?
And I couldn't change it back then, and it's remained my handle ever since. So there you go, on everything.
For this webinar, and of course everything that you're getting involved with Measurement Month, it's AMEC hashtag as well, AMEC. So let's get started. Enough of the intros. So we are here to talk about reach, and in particular we want to say that it's not just a problem with the word reach, because we do want to see how far our coverage has spread and how many people have seen it. But that's the point. We really do want to get clearer on who has seen it. Just wanted to try and play this. If it doesn't play, let us know in the chat.
Early days, but I think we are looking at a reach of potentially 12 billion eyeballs. Any questions?
Thank you, Jake. Firstly, for the brilliant creative you and your team put together, and for a fantastic execution. But what I'd really love to get a hold of is how exactly did you arrive at 12 billion eyeballs? Especially when you consider that the population of the planet is just a tick under 8 billion. Right, Fran?
Yeah, Fran is our numbers expert, but let me see if I've got this. We put a pizza in space.
We did.
And you couldn't move for news about the space shuttle deep discovery. And that thing stayed up there for 24 hours.
Closer to 28, actually, according to the online telemetry.
You know, and in that time, the Earth spins once on its axis, which means everybody on the planet had a chance to see the pizza. And most people have 2 eyeballs?
99.5% of them.
Obviously, not everybody is going to have seen it, so that's how we get to the figure of 12 billion eyeballs.
Right, I'm not sure that's how you measure coverage, Jake.
Hello, we are back. So yeah, some of you may have seen that already. It's the start of a video for Coverage Book, but the point being that I'm sure many of us have been in that situation and that scenario, which is a really horrible situation to be in, but we really do need to move on from it. Let's not talk about more eyeballs. First of all, that's just obviously for comedy, but let's not talk about the more people in the world seeing our coverage, or more people. But it does still happen, so we need to move on. But some of you will know James Alexander. He actually spoke in Prague at an AMEC event, but just wanted to bring him back into this because this is still happening. And he was working at Diageo, still is, and he actually did a huge project in re-looking at how they view earned media and earned coverage. And that was because he was disappointed in how the results were being viewed. So obviously there was still some budget being put into earned or PR, but it couldn't continue at the amount or grow because of the metrics that were being presented. And he has talked quite a lot about how they were viewed before he revised and changed it all. And it's not just senior people at organizations or our clients that view PR metrics in this way. So this is Russell McCarthy, he's a really interesting guy. I recommend following him on Twitter and having a look at some of his talks. So he's a much more in-depth marketing attribution consultant and expert, and his team are brought into quite big organizations when they are evaluating the success of different marketing channels. And quite often PR is just not there. They're not at the table because of the metrics we're using. So this is all stuff that we unfortunately do know, but there are things that we can change. And Russell wanted to make this clear that PR can be, it has been brought into some of their attribution models, but through different ways. So I've got another quote from him later on. He wanted to be sure that I wasn't just saying that it's never included, but when it is just those big inflated reach numbers, then it's not.
Les Bennett, Peter Field. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Bennett and Field, some of you may not. The TLDR version is that about 12 years ago, they wrote a landmark piece of work called The Long and the Short of It. It was looking at marketing effectiveness overall, but they examined decades worth of data. What they found was that the organizations that outperformed their peers when it came to marketing, PR, and communications typically devoted around 60% of their kind of budget and resources towards simply raising awareness or building the brand, and around 40% of their resources on channels and activities designed to activate or to generate an immediate result. The relationship of this to PR measurement is that if you have an inflated vanity number at the top of the funnel, then quite clearly it will make your ability to kind of calculate impact on outcomes at the bottom of the funnel if not impossible, very tricky, and it's the thing we all want to avoid. People start to question the credibility of your numbers. If you claim to have reached 1,000 people, but you didn't, then quite clearly the outcomes you could expect from actually having reached 1,000 people is going to be very different. Related to that, the paper being referred to there from LinkedIn, the long and the short of ROI, what they found was that, of course, everyone's expected to demonstrate ROI, but on the whole, whether you're marketing, PR, or comms, you're expected to prove ROI on average within a month. Even though everyone knows you can't do it in a month, it's almost certainly going to take a much longer period to truly calculate ROI. But a combination of these two factors, I think, that are kind of backdrop for why it's really important to have kind of more truthful numbers when it comes to who actually did see the editorial coverage that was generated. Let's take this a bit further. Why are whole of site numbers for media coverage reach a bit Mickey Mouse? Let's be honest. It's always struck me as odd. Why do we pick 30 days? If you go back to the old days of calculating kind of circulation reach, say for a daily newspaper, you calculate it per day, not per month. If a paper has a circulation of 1 million a day, I don't claim the figure's 30 million opportunities to see. So it's odd how that sort of monthly visit number to the media site is suddenly taken as the potential opportunity to see, when in fact that potential does not exist for a bunch of reasons. This is a screenshot from a tool called SimilarWeb, which some of you may have heard of. SimilarWeb has a huge panel of users and does a very good job, I think, at accurately calculating how much traffic sites get without having to hack their analytics. So this is an example for The Guardian. So The Guardian, this particular month had 316 million visits. So somebody might be tempted to say, ooh, potential reach 316 million. And let's be honest, I know people out there do count that as the potential reach, which of course is nonsense. First of all, look at that bounce rate, 57%. So over half of people visiting The Guardian reach a page and then go away again. Now you might say, yes, that's because they're visiting directly editorial coverage. They're not. That's because when you look at where does the traffic come from, The Guardian is really no different to any other media site. The vast majority of its traffic is going to come either directly or through Google search. In case of The Guardian, around 85% of that traffic comes this way. 45% is direct. The fact is, you can't visit a brand new page of editorial unless it exists. So where do these direct visits typically end up? They end up on the home page. Classic user behavior for media sites is you go to the home page, and what do you find there? You find headlines. You find headlines and first lines of the story. But do you click the link? Hate to tell you, you probably don't. I'm not saying nobody does, but far fewer people do. The long and the short of all of this is that by using the monthly visit number as a proxy for true reach, it's just not truthful, and it destroys your credibility. And as I say, if we're honest and truthful about trying to demonstrate impact, we need to have honest, truthful numbers at the top of the funnel, if you will, trying to properly estimate, properly calculate how many real people really did actually get to that page of editorial content to have any hope of what's contained in it having any kind of influence. Now, I know some people say, but what about social media? What about the effect of editorial coverage links being shared through social? And of course, that happens. We're not denying that. And people point to the engagement that it gets. I think the subtle nuance here is that engagement is with the post sharing the link. It's not with the content itself. And now EchoBox, really interesting company, works with lots of media sites. They've actually got the data that tells you how many people actually click those links that a media site shares through Facebook or Twitter, or whatever. Certainly in relation to Facebook, what they found was that on average, even a site like the BBC gets about a 2% click-through rate on its Facebook post. This is pretty universal. They actually broke it down by kind of type of editorial content. Sports content gets the highest click-through rate. well done sport. That's still 4.5%. At the low end, it's international news or technology. They're in the sort of just under 2%, 1.9. Again, all this drives to the idea that the number of people who actually get to read the full story, the full piece of editorial coverage, is significantly smaller than the overall site number. And just to reinforce that, Chartbeat's kind of the Google Analytics of the media world. It's interesting when a technology gets name checked in a popular Netflix series, which Chartbeat did with Finding Anna a few months ago. Anyway, the point being that Chartbeat's got access to thousands of media sites data from around the world. So between January and September this year, they examined media sites, thousands of media sites in 70 different countries. And what do they find? They found that, as they describe them, large media sites, BBC, Guardian, Telegraph, whatever you want to call them, those really big sites, 80% of their page views are generated from about 14% of the content. So this kind of 80-20 principle, Pareto principle really applies. It gets more interesting though, because smaller media sites typically do spread their traffic across a wider range of content, i.e. more stories get traffic, but of course they're smaller sites. So the overall traffic number is still smaller. So the number of people viewing those articles still relatively small. Now, I've been talking about this for quite some time. What does it mean? If you haven't got the message already, the number of people who actually do read, certainly online content, is typically a small proportion of the overall visitors to a site. Or another way of looking at it is that certain stories tend to get all the eyeballs, if I'm allowed to use that that phrase. And those whole of site numbers grossly exaggerate the actual readership and views to individual articles. Now, I know people sometimes get a bit depressed. It's, Andrew, this is not a story I want to hear. I don't want to hear this story that says all this work and effort I go to generate coverage, and you're telling me that actually nobody reads it. Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the number of people who really do see it is not going to be as big as quoting that big vanity number, but that's nothing to be afraid of. We shouldn't be scared of small numbers. But if we start from that honest base, then we can get better at working out the actual impact we really are having on real people and be recognized for the value of what that is contributing. Editorial it's a more truthful number, and these tools exist. Well, of course we are. Coverage Book being a prime example of a tool that is helpful in calculating those more honest and truthful numbers. A point I'll come back to later in the session is to bring us all back up again. This idea that actually in many ways we're not actually counting the true reach of editorial content, because we're not allowing for the fact that one of the ways, in fact probably the key way that online editorial coverage is seen today, is because it appears in Google search results, and people really do click through from those search results. And that can mean that your editorial coverage is gaining reach over days, weeks, months, possibly years after it was originally published. But we'll return to that. But to sum it all up, I think, yes, we all, if we're serious about proving and demonstrating real value and real impact, then we equally need to be more accurate and more honest in the numbers we try to work out in terms of who really did see the content that was created. So get comfortable with smaller numbers is the message.
Yeah, we saw right at the beginning, we just want two points. We want to be taken seriously, and we want to be taken seriously to be involved in those budget decisions, because the larger the numbers, without any kind of backing as to why we've got to that reach, or we don't get to be evaluated with other areas of marketing. So site-wide numbers, I'm going to come on to that. They're not all bad, but they have their place. So next time you are about to add a site-wide number, you just need to ask yourself, as you mentioned, no, it's never going to be on every page of the site. But even if you think, I actually got homepage coverage, that is absolutely amazing. But really do consider how long it was there for, and then think about, again, why are we using that 30-day number that Andrew mentioned? And then, is this used in other areas of marketing? As I mentioned, we want to be considered when budget decisions are happening, and we want to be in the comparison game. This is only one tiny part of PR measurement. Obviously, there's lots of other areas that I'm sure throughout measurement month, people are going to be sharing that we should be considered in your measurement plans. But this one metric could really set you back in losing that sort of faith. So we mentioned James Alexander earlier, and he did find that whenever he was getting the PR reports through from various agencies or teams in different markets for the different brands that he was looking after at Diageo, when there was a big reach number, he was left with nothing he could do further with that report. He knew that it was a great campaign. There was other metrics within that report that demonstrated it was a great campaign, but it was the reach number that he couldn't use. So he was actually, before he started using our estimated coverage views, he was trying to, he did a much simpler version of himself, just taking a percentage reduction of the total monthly traffic figures. Then he started to use estimated coverage views within Coverage Book, and then asked his teams to do the same, just so there was some comparison. Now, obviously, it is a prediction. We don't have access to publication analytics. Nobody does. So what we can do, though, is stop using ridiculous numbers and just get consistent, a little bit more realistic with the numbers. So how do we do that is always the question. And what we do is look at, for any kind of normal media coverage, we look at the sites and we look at where the coverage was placed, so whether it was on the homepage or somewhere else. We also look at the domain authority to look at the size of the site, so how many pages that people may have been split between. And then we also look at the potential shares and the actual shares as well. And then we also have that for social coverage as well. And as I say, it really does just give some kind of consistency and context. So no total monthly traffic at all. No, we do have that. And we do recommend that it's good to give context. So it's having the monthly traffic figures by itself isn't a good one, but it does it's great for context, especially if you're presenting coverage to a stakeholder and it's on a news site and they might not have heard of and they're not sure of the influence. It's great to have that kind of sense check. But what else do we consider? So we don't reveal the whole formula, but it's quite involved, but we do look at how many people. So if it's a social influencer, we look at how many people follow them. We get involved in lots. We've got a huge database now of coverage over the last 7 years, which we constantly bring back to review. And we also there's some really amazing studies, which even if you don't use our formula, if you have a look at your own, in just how to get a good gauge on how to bring down a more realistic view. Rival HQ's benchmark surveys are amazing. So things which are quite interesting with that is that sometimes you'd have the assumption that a higher follower count would result in a higher views, but actually their research would show, and this isn't just on social coverage, it's the same when you have a big website as well, the research will show that actually smaller amount of followers has a higher reach because it's less to find. And the same with websites. If you have a website with a really high domain authority, it has millions of pages for the total amount of traffic and the total amount of people to go amongst. So sometimes we get asked when people have put in a piece of coverage on a smaller website, and they're like, actually, this estimated views seems really high. It's probably because it's got less pages for the total amount of people to go to, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of that's involved in. And then also the estimated views that we look at is it's a prediction of its total lifetime as well. So it's something to consider there. Going back to Diageo and how they use it, because obviously it's not the actual number, but this is how they were able to use it as a point of consistency, and how they could actually just make some good budget decisions rather than just PR being left to the side when they were reviewing owned and paid. So they really just needed, so obviously there was tons of other metrics and huge amounts of measurement frameworks involved, but just as a one part of that was that they, within their paid and owned and social work, impressions was a key metric for them, and that was because they were looking at cost per impressions and they wanted to get a good idea of a value of that. And so James said that he could never really bring earned into that as a point of comparison, but he really needed to really get involved in those budget decisions. So what he would do was take the estimated views and use it as a proxy for impressions. And then he was able to do that for social coverage and media coverage as well. And then apply that as the same kind of thing as impressions, which is CPM. He was then able to just very simply apply that to the cost of the PR campaign and then calculate it, which here's an example. I'll include all of this in the summary email that I send out on Friday so we can get into the detail of it. But yeah, obviously there's all sorts of different ways of calculating value and more direct and accurate, but for these guys, and we know that there's some other customers as well who are starting to do this, it's just the first time that they've been able to get into a simple comparison to get it PR and earned into the same conversation around the marketing budget. I think, Andrew, this is over to you. So going back to the actual reach, it's not all bad news, is it? We don't just have to go to only estimated views, do we?
No, pick up on that earlier slide. If you take The Guardian as a good example of any media site on the planet, and where does its traffic come from? As I say, there are certain exceptions. I think places like BuzzFeed and Lad Bible are the rare exception where they have been able to generate more traffic to the site via social media than Google direct, but they're outliers. Everybody else, people come to a media site because they know it already exists and they don't need to be told how to find it, or it's because somebody searches in Google and a piece of editorial coverage ranks highly and you click through to read the piece that appears there. So you saw The Guardian, 45% of all editorial driven traffic coming via Google. So interesting study that was done by a tool company called Visibly in the US last year. Very simply, what they did was they said, let's look at search terms. Let's look at non-brand search terms, generics. An example here, electric car. And they said, what type and kind of content typically ranks highest in Google for those kind of generic terms? And what they found overwhelmingly was it was editorial coverage. In this particular example, we're looking at the search result page for Google UK. We're looking at the term electric car, and we're taking a specific car brand. In this case, we're taking Jaguar. Could be any car brand, quite frankly, Tesla, Suzuki, whatever. Now, if I were the head of PR at Jaguar, I might be disappointed initially because I would look at those results and go, there's no branded content there. There's no Jaguar branded content. But then actually there's no branded content from car vendors at all. It's overwhelmingly dominated by editorial coverage by Top Gear, Auto Express, etc. And then when you examine, does that coverage contain a reference to a particular brand? In the case of Jaguar, yes, it does. So that it's this concept of ranking by proxy, that it's not just your own content that can rank highly in Google. In fact, editorial coverage is far more likely to rank more highly because it's typically on a high domain, etc. The point here, though, is that in the case of say, Jaguar, there's traffic to those articles that talks about Jaguar that ordinarily would not be counted as part of that reach figure, because the reach figure would calculate it for effectively the time it was published or shortly afterwards, as opposed to, oh, look, that story is still at the top of Google 12 months later, generating over 50,000 visits to that specific article over a 12-month period. So do the sums, multiply 50,000 by 12, and you end up with 600,000. That's potentially 600,000 actual article views that might not have been accounted for. So I guess it's just to kind of really reinforce this idea that editorial coverage does get read by people. It's just not discovered and consumed in a way that historically, I think, as an industry, we've accounted for. So we might be depressed by the idea that the true initial reach number might be lower, but then if we're not then accounting for the fact that editorial coverage can continue to be seen by people and read by people and influencing people potentially long after the event, then that's something to look at. Visibility is one example of a tool that attempts to help you to try and do that. And I guess it's not to stop you manually trying to work out what are the search terms that result in coverage ranking highly in Google and calculating those additional reach numbers.
Yeah, and this is, I mentioned Russell Wright at the beginning, and he was keen that I did follow up with, it wasn't just a negative point that public relations doesn't get included in marketing attribution. It does, but when it's the association is proved to search, natural search and SEO, because obviously a lot of his clients are e-commerce, so there's always a revenue attached to it, and public relations is brought in when the PR teams are associating the massive search impact that PR obviously has. It's a whole different webinar, but he wanted to just really make that point, and he feels that he wishes that more of the PR teams, the clients that he was working with, was using some search data in their reports, because obviously that is, I know there's a lot of chat about accuracy and whether it's real data. That's how you can get to real data, by associating it to natural search, and the click-through increases searches around brand, product, which is like some of the share of search stuff that we've talked about in the past, or whether it's the visibility of coverage that Andrew just talked about. It's definitely where you can bring in some real accurate numbers as well. So I guess some final points. We've mentioned these really. Andrew, these are your ones. I'm going to take them.
Yeah, I just without boring everybody, but yes, the key point is attempting to get a kind of more accurate number. And I just noticed the chat reference to estimates aren't any good. Well, everything's an estimate. If anybody claims to have 100% precise and accurate data, then pass the joint. It's just not. It doesn't exist. Scientists have no issue whatsoever with allowing for error. Scientists never use a precise number. They don't do that. They always talk about ranges. That the answer lies within a range. that it's an estimate, because you're never going to get that perfection. It's foolish to expect to get that. Having said that, we can get better at trying to reduce the range of error as much as we can. But the simple fact is, everyone's estimating everything. Or rather, we're using techniques like sampling. SimilarWeb is the reason SimilarWeb is used is because they're using a gigantic sample. I believe it's around 100 million people worldwide have agreed to anonymously share their browsing habits. It's a representative sample of the 4.4 billion web users out there. Short of publishers handing over the keys to their own analytics tools, just anecdotally, I tried 20 years ago when media sites was first getting on the web. I approached a number of them and said, oh, look, as a PR person, I'd really like to know how many people actually visit an individual article. Would you give me access to those numbers? And they all said, no. I said, okay, what if I paid you? I'd give you money for that. They still said no, because even then, I think they were afraid that you would see the numbers and go, ooh, that's a lot smaller than the big number that you quote everybody about how many people visit the site overall. And, you know, anecdotally, you talk to journalists who've worked in media sites, and they know they know the truth. They know what the numbers are. Yeah, buy a beer, and they'll tell you, yeah, you're right. It's those numbers for individual articles will vary, and there is an 80-20 rule that certain stories tend to get acres of the traffic, and there's a long tail of content which gets a small number of people. That doesn't invalidate it, but as I say, if we want to be honest about the real impact we're having, we do have to try and get better. There are different methodologies. Coverage Book has one. There are others available to try and get to that more accurate number. But by definition, it's all being estimated from the outside. I don't think that invalidates it. I think if the methodology is transparent and you allow for the inaccuracy, or rather not the error potentially that's there, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, I think that there's an unexplored area here of the reach that is being generated that almost certainly isn't being taken into account. And again, the huge role that Google plays in delivering real human beings to the full story, the full article, rather than, oh, look, that link to that story got shared by a media site's Facebook page, which got 48,000 reshares and engagements. But as we saw from the Echo book box numbers, people are reacting to the post itself on the platform. And as we all know, all social media platforms like to keep you there rather than you go somewhere else. But it's just user behavior to stay on the platform rather than necessarily convinced to click the link. Puts a massive premium, of course, on the headlines of stories, because that's the one thing that people are most likely to see. If your brand is mentioned in the headline, then that's worth even more than it may have done in the past. That's a whole arena as well in terms of calculating the value of brand mentions in headlines. But yes, I think if we want to be taken seriously and truly demonstrate the real impact we're really having, then call me old-fashioned, I think we need to be more honest about the true value of the reach that our editorial coverage is actually having.
We'll come on to, I'm going to collected some of the questions from the chat, and we'll come on to those shortly. I think there's a real, what we need to remember in the PR industry as well, there's such a huge scale of development in measurement. I know from Coverage Book users, there's people who are probably some people who might be on this webinar and involved in AMEC who are really well developed in their measurement. And then there's the majority of the PR industry who are still using big reach figures and still requesting ABE as well to us, unfortunately. So yeah, it's really just to try and share as much knowledge as possible, which is what Measurement Month is all about, to encourage people outside of the just measurement experts as well and academics. But it is a good time to be thinking about this and to refresh and revise, or just at least have a look at what you've done before and what you can look at again. I know that there's been talk of where the original data point is coming from. As we've mentioned SimilarWeb quite a lot, because that is, I know that Andrew rates the data as much as we do. We don't have any, we could switch to a different provider, but we do research amongst all of those different providers every year based on websites that we have a huge set of set of websites that we have access to the analytics for, and we do find it's really accurate. Plus, in addition to that, to give you some reassurance, if you like, we do have quite a few customers who are involved in marketing director positions, who are involved in earned as well as paid. So when they are placing ads on some of the websites that they also get coverage on, and when they've had a good relationship, which some of the big brands do with some of the editors, they do get access to some of the page views, and they have sent that back to us. And thankfully, the estimated views metric is like it's amazingly spot on. So that's always nice to see. And that has been quite a few of some of the bigger brands customers who we've seen that from. Okay. Good to see a good lively chat. I have seen quite a few different questions come through, but one that I wanted to have a look at was from Rob near the beginning. Do people visiting by search go to an editorial page or homepage? Is there a split? I guess it depends what the search is, right, Andrew?
Yeah, but so the key point there, I think, is that yes, of course, home pages of media sites can be discovered through search, but that's because people are searching for the brand term. That's where they're searching for The Guardian, The Telegraph, Daily Mail, whatever. The interesting thing is where editorial content is surfaced for generic terms like electric car, similar. So that the traffic generated through search, yes, a lot of it is because people have searched for the and again, you think, don't people bookmark the home pages for their favorite media sites? We all should, but we don't. It explains why, for example, even now in 2022, if you look at things like the Hootsuite, We Are Social, big sort of digital compendium of stats, and it shows you these are the most top 10 search terms, full stop, on Google. Facebook. Why are we still looking for Facebook in 2022? We know where Facebook is, but we're lazy. So we search for that, and that's how we find facebook.com in the homepage. Ditto with media sites. If the question is, what's that split between searches for the brand term and search for generic terms that leads to non-homepage based editorial, again, it will vary because you're going to see more brand search than generic, but it's still sizable. I think that's the interesting point, that you're looking at where is that editorial coverage being surfaced through search. What are the keyword terms that the audiences are looking for? And Google saying, out of all the millions, potentially billions of pages we could show you, that one we think is the most relevant for you. I still think that's a kind of unexplored area of kind of PR and measurement. Is we're leaving money on the table. You should be claiming back, getting proper credit for the extended reach that's been generated.
There was a quick question, somebody asking why LinkedIn data isn't in coverage books, because it's locked. We get the data that is out there and available for us to pull in. If it's not available, I don't think it's any secret that any tool is entirely dependent upon the platform's data APIs. Hence why Twitter historically has provided the widest range of data through its APIs. Hence why there's a load more tools for Twitter than other platforms. LinkedIn, rightly or wrongly, has always been pretty tight when it comes to allowing third parties access to their data. I remember a few years back when they deprecated the shares API, where they previously had revealed how often content was being shared on LinkedIn, and lots of tool vendors were sad face emoji crying when overnight they were told, we're taking that away from you. And people complain to their vendor saying, why has it disappeared? It's like, it's not just us. Nobody has that anymore. So who knows? Maybe it will change in time, but as it stands, LinkedIn data, pretty tough to get your hands on legally. I think a lot of the chat was more statements rather than questions. Yeah, Marie, it'd be great to hear what your alternatives are, what you do, how you get your accurate data, because publishers don't reveal their exact analytics. But if anyone else has any questions that they want us to, oh, here we go. Here's another one. How do you get Twitter data? Is there alternative to BuzzSumo?
If you roll your sleeves up, you could sign up for a Twitter developer account and try and extricate the data you want yourself through the Twitter API. That's not going to be for everybody. I think that's always been the case. Do you spend time to save money or money to save time? And that the whole reason we have third-party tools like BuzzSumo, for example, is that they spare you the effort of attempting to do it all yourself. You're welcome to try and do it yourself, but the PR industry typically doesn't like to pay for things. It's like, how can I get this for nothing? The usual answer is, well, do it yourself, which may take you a considerable amount of time to do it. You might become an expert in Twitter APIs, but whether that's a transferable skill, I don't know. But the fact is, BuzzSumo, you do pay for it, but at the same time, you still have to pay for it. That's the point. You have to pay to get that extra data out of the Twitter API. So you're going to have to pay for it somewhere. You might not pay as much, but you still have to pay for it.
Question from Katie comes in. So what's the best way to provide clients with a combined picture? So if we are looking at search results, coverage views, social views, this is a good question, because I guess for the estimated views within Coverage Book, it does factor in the engagements of that post. But then if you wanted to add, I guess with the search results, that's the visibility of the coverage. You might want to look at the search volume for different, it might be more than one term that it's appearing for, to get a good picture of that. I'm guessing, Andy, this is probably one for you, but would you use something like Data Studio to be collecting?
I think my my love of Data Studio was well documented. I think with technically I should now call it Google Looker, because they've rebranded Google Data Studio. I think that's just more a question of that there is something that actually is free that does allow you to bring in data from different sources and to combine them and to try and build that kind of more holistic picture of what's kind of going on. So a quick example might be to take the coverage or the data rather from, say, Coverage Book, because of course, the nice thing about Coverage Book is that if you want to, you can get the numbers out as well, because you've very helpfully calculated an estimated coverage view. But then if you, for example, wanted to use a tool like URL Profiler to do sentiment analysis on the coverage and then combine those together in one place, you've now got access to not only the estimated reach, but also the sentiment values, rinse and repeat for other things. The coverage URL is the kind of the join, if you will, in lots of different potential data sets, which you would obtain through different sources. Or, for example, if you wanted to correlate reach with, say, search volume. We know this, having been involved with the innovation panel on share of search, but arguably, let's say you've been getting some fantastic coverage and you're looking at the reach numbers, the estimated reach numbers, and you think, what effect is that having on people's awareness of us? Which is typically a question that people go, how do I answer that one? If you can correlate that with, say, an increase in brand-related search, maybe there's the answer. As brand search volume rises, it's correlated with wider reach generated through editorial coverage, social media impressions, etc. And then when people say, but how do I know that that it was all down to editorial coverage, or was editorial responsible for 50% of that increase and social for the other 50%. There's a nifty tool that I discovered earlier this year called Data Tab. If you Google Data Tab, it's actually two, I think, German statisticians have built this nice little online tool that allows anyone, not just statistics professors, to input numbers and perform all manner of statistical tests on it. But the neat bit is that it will bring back a kind of plain English explanation as to whether or not the results are meaningful or statistically significant. So again, imagine plugging in your reach numbers and your outcome numbers and saying, is there a statistically significant relationship between the two? Or do a multivariate one where you're looking at social, editorial coverage, other elements of the marketing mix and going, yes, the idea that, for example, editorial coverage has had nothing to do with an outcome being generated is the null hypothesis, is supremely unlikely. So it's editorial coverage is having some effect on outcomes. Now we get into the question of how much, but that's a neat way of doing it. So yeah, Data Tab's a nifty little bit of kit. For those statistically minded, even if you're not statistically minded, but you don't want to spend 4 years learning statistics, then this is quite a neat way to do those kinds of tests without having to know underlying mechanics. They've got some great videos as well to explain various concepts.
A couple of other ones. There's a couple of quick coverage book questions that I can answer very quickly. Somebody asked if there's an API planned to get the numbers out of coverage book that's been added. You can just download the CSV within there, so you can just, yeah, that's available now. If you want to learn more about the metrics that are just within coverage book, you can join that one next week. I'll put details in the email. Let's see if there's any others. Any last questions from people? Another quick one I can answer was whether there's plans to be adding CPM that I mentioned that Diageo was working out from estimated views into coverage book. No, not at the moment, because that's just one of many ways to calculate financial value from PR, and we wouldn't want to try and push one over any other ones. And so we do mention quite a few different ones on the blog, though. So from looking at direct click-throughs to working out how much money might have been made from natural search from coverage, or whether to do value from CPM. There's all sorts of different ways to try and get to a pound sign or a dollar sign, but we wouldn't want to just have one that we have within the tool.
I'll just say there that the opportunity to take the data that is in coverage book and bring it out, put it into something like Google Data Studio /Looker, do your own calculated metrics. There's nothing to stop anyone from coming up with their own calculations and formulas, trying those out. And I'd always say, what have you got to lose by experimenting with taking the data and coming up with your own calculation?
Thank you to you, Andrew, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Sharing your knowledge. Cool. I'm looking forward to the rest of Measurement Month and seeing what everybody else is sharing.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.